Hello there, and welcome to today's episode of the Only Endometriosis podcast you need. Today we're going to be talking about natural management of endometriosis. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about what endometriosis is from an alternative, in inverted commas, medical perspective. I'm going to be talking about why natural management of symptoms is useful. I'd say it's essential, but let's stick with useful for now. A little bit about what it can and can't achieve, and also the next steps to take if it's something that you're looking at or thinking about for yourself. And just a quick one as well, as always, I talk about endometriosis, but this is also equally pertinent and useful for anybody who's struggling with things like adenomyosis, fibroids, polycystic ovaries, anything of that ilk. So apologies if you can hear banging and crashing. It's incredibly windy in the northwest of England today. We don't have it as bad as other places in the UK. But it is incredibly noisy. So there's air vents crashing and banging in the background. There's other things. I think somebody's dustbin has just fallen and might be flying down the street. So there's all sorts of weird noises going on in the background. So not dissimilar to every other podcast I ever do, but even more so maybe today. So anyway, I digress. Let's crack on. So natural management of endometriosis. Obviously, this is something I'm incredibly passionate about. I've been managing my own endometriosis for over 20 years. For those of you who don't know me, I will share a little bit about my journey, but I'm sure you're all probably sick of hearing it. But for me, it's something that we need to talk more about. We don't currently have enough research generally on endometriosis. There isn't enough positive and realistic information about endometriosis out there, and there certainly isn't enough viable and realistic information about naturally managing your endo symptoms out there. So it's something that I'm really passionate about. It's something that we need to talk about. And even if you don't agree with every single thing I'm going to say in this podcast, if there are bits and pieces that you'd like to explore more, chat to people about, please do. And even the bits you don't agree with, please do chat to other people about it, because the more we talk about it, the more we not necessarily extol the virtues of it, but the more we talk about it, the more we have these realistic, honest, open and discussions about it, the more educated the general public will be, male and female, about what it is that we're going through and the type of treatments that are actually available to us. So, welcome. What is endometriosis? So, this is kind of it's a sticking point, really. Because that question doesn't necessarily have a clear answer. Western medicine can't really give us an explanation as to why we get endometriosis. There isn't a particular load of research that's been done. But Western medicine kind of says, well, we don't know why you get it. Some women do, some women don't. It's just bad luck. And there are differing reasons or different theories as to why. I've done podcasts and videos on some of the reasons. So there's like the retrograde theory of menstruation, which has largely been poo-pooed, but for me there's some element of truth in it. There's a whole host of different reasons, but nobody can really give us a definitive answer in terms of why we get endo. If you flip it and look at it from an alternative medicine point of view, then there are a few reasons that you can get endometriosis. And if you have sat through my free webinar on the 3 steps to managing your endo, then that gives you a lot more background in terms of why, from an alternative Chinese medicine perspective, we get endometriosis. And I might actually do some podcasts around that series as well. But essentially, what happens in my world when we get endometriosis is that it's essentially caused by blockages. Now, that's a completely simplistic way of looking at it, and it's a very complex theory that sits behind it. But to put it simply, because it's a shorter podcast than I would need to go into all of these different things, blockages are caused by either physical or emotional traumas. And that can either be like a very short but intense trauma, or a very kind of moderate to low trauma that happens over a long space of time. So, for example, if you have something that happens to you, like a fall, say, I've worked with loads and loads of women who have fallen off a horse. I fell off a bike when I was about five or six, and I've worked with so many women who have sort of a similar trauma to me. So falling off a horse, falling off a bike, falling downstairs. The crucial thing is that it does a bit of damage to your lower back, to your coccyx. Now, it doesn't always have to be your lower back. You can actually have neck injuries that manifest in the pelvis. But more often than not, the women that I've worked with over the years anyway, the injury has stemmed from a historical lower back thing. So that can be a jolt to the pelvis. Now, what can happen as well, even though the jolt, so some women will have a jolt that's bad enough to cause them distress right from day one. Most of the women I've worked with, and I would say probably 95% of the women I've worked with, and I include myself in this bit, is the injury is a little bit painful at the time, but you kind of get up, you brush yourself off, and within a week, normally even within 24 hours, you're back doing the activity that you had the injury from. However, what it does do is cause what we call a subluxation in the bottom of our spine. So, and again, this isn't necessarily the same for every woman, but essentially what's happening is it's causing a slight, don't know what you'd call it, but a slight movement of the spine. And it's nothing significant. So it's not something that if you walked into a doctor that they would recognise instantly. It's not something that would even show up on an x-ray. But what it does do is slightly tilt, or causes a slight tilt of the, well, essentially of the pelvis. But this happens over a long period of time. So it's something that you are conscious of or subconsciously start to make changes because it hurts. So it could be something that, for example, you know that if you sit down for long periods of time, it starts to ache. So you sit slightly at an angle. Or when you're carrying heavy bag, you always put it on your left shoulder, because if you carry it on your right shoulder, you start to get lower backache. Little things like this that we consciously or subconsciously do that just over time exacerbates that injury. So I've worked with so many people over the years who kind of say things like, oh yes, I do have a tilted uterus, or I have a tilted pelvis, or I have one leg longer than the other. Essentially what's happened is over time, your body has adjusted itself because it's tried to avoid the pain. We do it all the time. It's exactly the same as if we burn our fingers. Quite often we'll forget and pick something up, and the pain will remind us that injury is there, and then we'll avoid doing something with that finger again for the next couple of days. It's exactly the same principle. What's happening is our body is tensing up exactly the same way as an injury to our shoulder or anything else. The body tenses up to protect that pain and to give that muscle, to give that bit where you've banged it by falling off, whatever it is you've fallen off, to give it time and space to heal. But what essentially happens then, and more often than not, it goes back to normal, or you think it's gone back to normal, but there may be a slight weakness there, and your body just adjusts itself. If you think about it in terms of that neck pain, what can happen if you don't listen to your neck pain, if you don't relax that neck pain? You start to get even tenser. The pain, the tension, the pain and the tension start to creep into different areas. And it's exactly the same with our lower back. And this is one of the reasons, it's called the love-it brother relationship. This is one of the reasons why sort of upper back pain can also cause pain in the cervix, in the lower back and pelvic areas. So essentially what's happening is our body is compensating. So when you're standing up, you're maybe shifting your weight slightly to one side, the same as when you're sitting down, you might be shifting slightly to the left. When you're carrying things, when you're bending, when you're picking things up, you are either consciously or subconsciously compensating for that pain. Like I say, exactly the same as when you've cut your finger. You might try and do something in inverted commas normally, and that pain just shoots to remind you it's there. And the next time you bend or stand or whatever it is that you are doing, you will, first of all, consciously try and avoid that pain. So you will shift your weight, you will do whatever it is you do to avoid that pain happening. And then that becomes muscle memory. That's the way of doing it. And the more you do that over time, the more that becomes normal. Muscles tighten, and that just gently, again, nothing permanent, nothing massively debilitating, but over time that muscle tension and the tension in the soft tissue just kind of gently pulls our bones, I suppose, our skeleton. So you can see it in people's knees as well. This is really common. People with, and not just women, but people with tight hamstrings, people with tight psoas muscles, if that tension is there for any long periods of time, people start to get issues with their hips, they start to get issues with their knees. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with the knees or the hips, it's because of this tension. in the soft tissue and the muscles that have gently kind of shifted how the knee works. If you think, or the hip, if you think about the ball and the socket joints, there's a beautiful kind of synergy between them. They work effortlessly. If that movement is slightly off kilter, so if the tension in the muscle is causing the knee to move differently, then that's when you start to get the rubbing. That's when you start to get the clicks. That's when you start to get almost like those cartilage type issues. So exactly the same happens in our pelvis. So 95% of women that I work with have had some sort of physical trauma to the lower back. Nothing massively serious, nothing debilitating, just some sort of jolt that causes muscle spasm. That spasm comes and goes over time, but what we don't realise is that the tension and the pain causes us to readjust slightly how we do things. And over time, that has massive impact. So over time, that's when we start to see, like I say, tilted pelvis, tilted uterus, wonky cervix. I'm sure somebody said wonky cervix to me the other day. We do have delightful turns of phrase from doctors, don't we? I quite like wonky cervix, actually. That's something that it's a badge I could wear with pride. But yeah, that's what causes. So that's one of the reasons why. That's one of the starting points that Chinese medicine tells us that we start to develop endometriosis, and I'll come to why in a second, because I also haven't touched on. So that can also be childbirth as well. So quite often we see people talking about childbirth as a cure for endometriosis, or we don't so much now, but certainly used to. But that's one of the reasons why Chinese medicine tells us that endometriosis can disappear after childbirth, because essentially if you've had this tilt in your pelvis, if you've had a slightly off balance pelvic area, then quite often a traumatic birth, as well as causing a tilt in the pelvis, can actually kind of cause it to go back to how it was. So if in alternative medicine, that's kind of the reasoning behind the, in inverted commas, cure. Of course, a traumatic birth could actually tilt your pelvis. It could actually cause the tension and the pain that could kickstart endometriosis as well. So that's the physical side of things. When we come to the emotional side, in my world, our emotions sit within our bodies. So when we're living with anxiety, if we've experienced trauma, and again, this could be low levels of anxiety, this could be a low-level trauma that happened years ago that we live with over decades sometimes, or it could be a very, very intense and deep trauma that happens more recently. There's not necessarily a right or wrong, there's no rhyme or reason for which of these sort of manifest worst in inverted commas, but equally they are both in Chinese medicine responsible, in inverted commas, for, I keep doing that and I keep forgetting you can't see me, responsible for endometriosis developing. So why does it develop? So if you think about our bodies as channels, or having channels running through them, in Chinese medicine, in Ayurvedic medicine, in basically all forms of Eastern medicine, and it used to be the case in our ancient medicines as well, the belief system is such that we have things flowing freely through us. So we have energy channels, we have meridians, we have energy flowing through us at all times. We also have obviously blood flowing, we have water flowing. This flow is essentially what keeps us happy and healthy. So when we look at things like acupuncture, when we look at reflexology, even massage to some degree, if you go to an Eastern medicine practitioner of massage, all of these practices are designed to keep our body loose, to keep that energy flowing, to stop the blockage of energy, because it's that blockage of energy and the blockage of water and blood that starts to see dis-ease forming, that starts to see all of the symptoms that we see, especially with endometriosis. So if you think about it, the analogy I always use, so again, if you've listened to other podcasts or if you've seen my webinar, then you'll know that the analogy I always use is the Nile. So if you think about a river, if you think about the energy channels and the blood and the water flowing through our bodies as if it's a river, then as soon as that river starts to block, as soon as we start to see something stopping the energy, so for example, a slightly tilted pelvis, or scar tissue, or just tension in muscles, that acts as a block for the energy, exactly the same as a tree falling over the river. Now, what can happen if it's just a small twig? that will just get washed away. So if it's a small trauma, if our resilience is high, if we are feeling good, if our energy is flowing freely elsewhere, then that small stick of trauma, that small stick of injury, maybe will last a nanosecond, it might last a couple of days, but essentially what will happen is our body will heal itself, the flow will return naturally, and things will carry on as they were. If that stick is a bigger stick, or if that stick gets stuck on something else, or if it's a stick that just stays in the same position for a long period of time, that's when we start to see stagnation. So in the analogy of the river, that's when we start to see over time other sticks get caught. So again, we talk about resilience. If your resilience is lower, that's kind of like your dam is building up. Your energy is getting blocked more because you're getting more and more sticks stopping your energy flow. Similar to the tilted pelvis, if your pelvis is tilted, so if your muscles are tight, if your bones are slightly out of kilter, if your skeleton's slightly out of kilter, then that energy flow is going to be impeded for longer. So if you think about it again, if we come back to the water analogy, when you get a bigger stick or a branch or even a tree falling over water, or if you get little sticks building up into almost like a dam effect, the water stays still, the water stops flowing. Now, sometimes the water can sort of trickle round it, but in extreme circumstances, that's where there's absolutely no flow at all. So that water becomes a pond. And over time, because there's no flow into that water, the pond becomes stagnant. And with stagnant, we get that awful, again, if you think about the water element, we start to get that awful toxic smell. We start to get the scum and the film on top of the water. We start to see general things kind of just going a little bit wrong. So the lush grass at the side of the water starts to die off. It starts to be malnourished, misnourished. The toxins from this stagnant water start to impact on everything. In Chinese medicine and Eastern medicine, that's exactly the same concept with our body. So when our energy stops the flow, when our energy stops, also we're causing restriction in our blood flow. So the whole thing just starts getting very, very stagnant. And that's what we call it. In terms of Chinese medicine, in terms of Eastern medicine, we call it stagnation. And this is the same. This isn't just with endometriosis. This is everything. So if you get any blockage at any point of your energy flow, this is exactly what happens. The symptoms for stagnation, there are many and far-ranging, but the ones that we normally talk about, the most common ones, are things like, exactly as you'd expect, toxic kind of things happening. So you start to see build-up of water, so water retention, bloating. You start to see things like toxic smells. You start to see things like pain, bruising, cysts. We start to see all of these things that are stagnant. The symptoms of that stagnation are things that we start to see, especially in endometriosis. Endometriosis is like a textbook example of stagnation. If you Google stagnation in terms of TCM, so in terms of traditional Chinese medicine, if you Google stagnation or symptoms of stagnation, all of the things that will come up could be attributed to endometriosis. Now, obviously, there's loads of chronic health conditions. I've worked with hundreds over the years. I've worked with people who don't have chronic health conditions but are struggling at the time. Their symptoms are also stagnation, but they will have maybe one or two. With endo, you can basically do a tick list of all the symptoms against all the symptoms of stagnation. And that's because our abdominal cavity, our uterus, our womb, everything that sits in our abdominal cavity is so vital to our well-being. So when we have stagnation in our abdomens, it kind of exacerbates everything else that's going on. I would say, Chinese put way more emphasis on our gut health and our digestive system in terms of our general well-being than they do around our mind and our brain. So if you think about all the stuff that's in our abdominal cavity, if you're starting to see stagnation there, if you're starting to see a blockage of flow of energy and flow of blood, it isn't just that immediate area. So it's not just our wombs that's being impacted, but we've got the whole of that area. We've got our bladders, we've got our bowels, we've got everything in there that starts to share that stagnation. So I've gone on for way longer than I wanted to when I was planning. This was just supposed to be a 2-minute, a 2-minute synopsis about endometriosis. So this may be a feature-length podcast, but that's essentially what alternative medicine tells us endometriosis is. In a nutshell, endometriosis is the result of stagnation, and stagnation happens when we have tension in our muscles. That also can cause things like tilted pelvis, all the rest of the stuff I've talked about, but essentially what's happening is the energy is getting blocked, and as the energy gets blocked, the stagnation builds up. Western medicine hasn't caught up to this theory yet. Western medicine, there's little bits of Western medicine that has, and they do extol the virtues of acupressure, acupuncture, not so much acupressure actually, but acupuncture is creeping into Western pain management, although it's still not, it's very much in terms of localized. You put the pins where it's hurting. They haven't quite got to the point necessarily where they're buying into the meridian and the energy channels, but it's a start. But yeah, so Western medicine hasn't quite caught up with this idea. But if you look at it from an Eastern medicine perspective, suddenly endometriosis makes so much sense. Once endometriosis makes sense, you can then start to tackle it. So for those of you who don't know, I have a 3-step protocol for endometriosis, and step 1 is exactly that. Step 1 is understanding endometriosis, and that probably sounds really patronising. I do apologise. I don't mean to make it sound anything like that, but the way we are told about endometriosis, the way we're told about periods, about flow, about energy in Western culture doesn't do endometriosis justice. When you flip it from an Eastern medicine perspective, then suddenly everything starts to make sense. There's so many different, I don't know what the word is really, but there's so many different connotations, I suppose, in terms of what could be causing endometriosis, but also how your endometriosis manifests, that it's really hard to say this works for endometriosis. And you'll hear me say all the time, everybody is different. And there is no truer time than when you're talking about endometriosis, because when you want to manage your endometriosis naturally, understanding what is causing your endometriosis and understanding how your endometriosis is manifesting is vital if you're going to manage your symptoms. Because I could say to somebody, I could say to client 1, let's say, I could say to client 1, right, okay, do these meditations to clear trauma and do these exercises that will release the left side of your hip, and do these acupressure points that will, that will remove the blockage in your C3 on your spine. And that over time will start to alleviate your endometriosis. Client 2, however, completely whole different kettle of fish. She may not have trauma in her past. She might be completely fine in neck area. She might have not any issues, any pain, any trauma, physical trauma at all in her upper back. It might purely be down to, difficult childbirth. I worked with one client way before COVID, who had never had endometriosis, but had a child quite young. I think she was 23 when she had her child. And it was an incredibly traumatic birth. It ended up in a C-section. And that triggered her endometriosis. And actually I'm saying for her, trauma wouldn't be a thing. There's trauma around childbirth. So trauma release might be a thing for her, but you can see what I'm saying, hopefully, that everybody's journey towards an endometriosis diagnosis is completely different. And when you can break down your endometriosis, when you can see what's caused it, when you can see how it manifests, that's when you start to understand it, and that's when you can start to really manage it naturally. But why do we need to manage it naturally? Well, let me tell you. I do think that natural management of endometriosis is essential. And even if you want to manage it in conjunction with your Western medicine pathway, that's absolutely fine. But the one thing I'd say is please do not dismiss natural symptom management of endo. When we are in control of our health, when we feel in control of our health, we are way more empowered as individuals. And this ekes out into each and every area of our lives. But when we're talking about health, and especially endometriosis, one of the conversations I have all of the time with prospective clients, with general people who I chat to about periods and endometriosis. One of the recurring themes is how dismissed we feel when we're talking to medical professionals. And that is getting better. There's way more understanding, at least not necessarily from an Eastern medicine perspective, but there is a lot more understanding in general on our journeys. But the level of dismissals, the level of gaslighting that we experience is still, well, let's be honest, it's still completely unacceptable. The more empowered we feel, the more able we are to stand up and say no, the more able we are to say, well, hang on, this isn't good enough. And that's incredibly important when it comes to endometriosis. It's incredibly important when it comes to any aspect of our life. But when it comes to our medical care, it's really, really important. And when we take that whole body approach, when we take that, I don't necessarily like the word, but when we take that holistic medicine approach, that Eastern medicine approach, we are in way more control of our health than we ever have been before. So once you can understand that endometriosis in terms of your own journey, when you can understand your causes, your manifestation of endo, you feel more able to talk with authority about what's going on with your body, because nobody knows your body better than you. Even before you start looking at the Eastern medicine perspective, even before you start getting that much deeper understanding of your endo, you still know more about your body than anybody else. But we just get that confidence, that ability kind of stripped away from us. So that's the first thing. It empowers us. It gives us that control and that power to speak up for our own health way more than we ever could before. And it also empowers us to take more control over more things that we can control, if that makes sense. So quite often when we're having a flare-up, it's too easy for us. And that's I shouldn't say that, because it isn't easy. None of your endometriosis journey is easy, and I get that. But it's too easy, I'll say it again, to let endometriosis impact on every area of our lives. And once you break it down again from an Eastern medicine perspective, what that does is give you control, a lot more control over well-being. It gives you control over things you can control. So for some people, diet is a massive positive impact. Controlling diet can really help with some people's endometriosis. Not everybody, because some people don't have those symptoms that come from the digestive area. It depends if your digestive system is impacted by endo. Not quite that simple, but it enables you to see which bits of your endo you actually can control and which bits you need external help for. And by external help, I mean acupuncturists or herbalists or surgeons. Not anti-surgery and not anti-Western medicine, but what managing your symptoms naturally does, it does enable you to really break down, take control of your well-being, take control of your emotional health, and take control of what you can, and then be really clear about what you need that external help with. It does improve your quality of life, because the stuff that we work on when we work on managing symptoms, it also encompasses the mind, body, spirit. So we're working on our emotions, we're working on the spiritual aspect, whether you're religious or non-religious. That spiritual aspect, nurturing our soul, makes us generally feel better. So if we are looking at natural endometriosis management, what essentially we're doing is looking at feeling as good as we possibly can do, and that is not a bad thing. It also helps us focus on long-term solutions. So quite often we and again, I know I sound really down when I say stuff like this, but quite often with Western medicine, as women with women's health issues, we are kind of taught or begin to expect to just look at short-term solutions. So we look at taking painkillers for when we've got pain, knowing that in 6 hours' time we're going to have to take another raft of painkillers. And I know that 6 hours is a long time for some of you. I know it's more like 6 minutes sometimes, but all flippancy aside, that's something that we kind of learn to live with. We learn to live with the fact that we have very, very short-term interventions. And even when we look at surgery, we know, and all the women I speak to about surgery know that surgery isn't necessarily going to be a long-term solution for them. They know that they are going into surgery with the possibility that their symptoms could come back at any time. But they are just so desperate for that relief that they will look at anything. And I completely get that. When you are more in control of the symptoms, so when you are able to manage your pain a lot better, when you're able to reduce bloating easily, in inverted commas, when you're able to feel good even though your symptoms are flaring, then that gives you hope for longer term solutions, because the solutions do become longer term. So even if you do have surgery and even if the symptoms come back, if you're in a position where you can minimise those symptoms, then the surgery will give you longer term respite, because you're more able to manage and to physically and emotionally cope with the symptoms if they do come back again. So I might do a whole other podcast on this, because there's other benefits of managing endometriosis and any health condition, naturally, to be honest. But that's why I think it's so important. Even if you are completely set on the idea of surgery, completely set on your Western medicine pathway, and I completely honour that. That's a completely viable journey for many, many, many women. Understanding endometriosis from an Eastern medicine perspective will support you on that journey too. That's why I don't like the word alternative. It isn't an alternative. I suppose complementary is really good as well. That sounds a bit, it's just a bit weak. I don't know. I never know what to call it. Natural, okay, it is natural, but there are techniques. It's not just about going into Holland and Barrett and taking off the shelf natural remedies, or it's not just about eating naturally, although that's obviously part of it, or it can be, doesn't have to be. But when we look at that holistic approach, whatever we want to call it, what's in a name, hey? But when we look at this natural approach, this alternative or complementary approach, it doesn't have to be instead of Western medicine. But what we do need to do, and what I do need to do, is talk about it more, because what we are offered at the minute by our doctors is just the Western medicine. But if we start to look at natural medicine, if we start to look at this natural approach, then we do get a lot more answers. So that's why we need to do it. So I've kind of touched on this a little bit. So what do you do if you want to manage your endometriosis naturally? So, as you know, I have a 3-step process. So my 3-step process is as follows. As I've already said, step 1 is about understanding endometriosis, because once you do completely understand your endo, you can manage it a lot better. So, for example, I know exactly what triggers my endometriosis now. I've managed my endometriosis naturally for 20 years. I still have endo. I haven't cured endo. I haven't got rid of my endo. I've had 2 major flare-ups in all of that time, so I know it's still there, and I know that if I do certain things, I will get sort of symptoms recurring, and that's not necessarily on a day-to-day basis. I don't have to do things every day, but I know that if I don't take care, in inverted commas, again, that's really annoying. I hope I'm not annoying you. I'm annoying myself saying that. But if I don't take care of myself over a prolonged period of time, then I know that I will start to get my endo symptoms flaring again. So step 1 is understanding your symptoms. So I talk about symptoms, causes and triggers. I won't go into all of that because that's another half-hour episode, but I might do another episode on that in a bit. But once you understand what is your endo symptoms, what are your endo triggers, what are your endo causes, and you don't even have to understand them to an nth degree, but once you have some idea about what all of those things are for you, you can start to manage it. So you can start doing things that, and there's different levels of management as well, so you can start to do things that just alleviate your symptoms. So pain, for example, if pain is one of your symptoms, because again, endo doesn't necessarily mean pain for everybody, but if pain is one of your symptoms of endometriosis, there are natural ways you can manage pain. So if you just want to manage pain, if you're not interested in going deeper than that, then there are natural things you can do to complement the Western pain relief medication. There's techniques you can do. So if you hone in on the techniques or learn techniques, trial and error techniques, once you find what works for you, then you know as soon as that pain starts, you've got things that you can do that will minimise the pain that you're experiencing. If you want to go slightly deeper than that, then once you understand what triggers your pain, so once you understand if things like doing sit-ups triggers your abdominal pain, if you know that bloating triggers your abdominal pain, if you know that running or stress or whatever it is that becomes your trigger for the pain, you can then start to mitigate that. So you can start to say, well, okay, I'm going to do sit-ups at the gym today, but I know that that means that tomorrow morning I'm going to have pain. So I'm going to do this technique in the morning so I know that I'm not going to get pain, if that makes sense. Or you can just say, well, I'm never doing sit-ups again, which would be lovely. So you can start to manage your triggers. You can start to mitigate your triggers so that you can avoid even the symptoms starting in the first place. Or if they do start, you've then got a toolkit of techniques that will help you manage the symptoms and reduce the symptoms. And if you want to go really all in, then you can start to address the root causes as well. Because if your root cause is something like, so for example, that lower back tension, if you have loads of tension in your lower back and lower pain, which is sort of causing that subluxation, if you start to identify the muscles that are causing that tension and start to relax them, which can be a journey in itself. And again, I'll do another podcast on that in a few weeks. But you can start to look then at relaxing the muscles that are actually causing the endometriosis. And that's the point that I've got to now. So I know exactly what causes my endometriosis, or I think I know exactly what causes my endometriosis. I haven't been able to, well, that's not true. I could have done had I been that bothered to really eradicate the cause of my, or the causes of my endometriosis, because most of us have way more than one. There's probably 2 or 3 causes for everybody in terms of endo. And had I worked tirelessly, had I changed my lifestyle completely, had I done completely different things, then I might well have been able to eradicate the cause. But let's be honest, who wants to live like that? I've got it to a level where it's manageable, and that's what I'm happy with. But again, your goal is your goal. You might just want to manage your symptoms, you might want to manage your triggers, and you might want to completely eradicate the cause. I don't know whether eradicating the cause would completely eradicate your endometriosis, because I've never worked with anybody who's gone that deep, and I haven't even gone that deep myself. So it's not anything that I can say that if you definitely did this, you would definitely never have a flare-up again. I can't say that. Can't say it wouldn't happen, can't say it would happen, because I don't have any experience of it. But if you want to try it, let me know. So stage 2 is about learning what works for you. So stage 2 is all about learning the techniques. So things like acupressure. So there's 2 phases of this, actually, not phases, but there's 2 facets of it, I suppose. One is understanding what you can do yourself and learning what works for self-care. So things like acupressure, reflexology, diet, lifestyle choices. That kind of steps into step 3, but I'll come to that in a second. All of those things that you can do yourself, the techniques you can do yourself, aromatherapy, breathing exercises, meditation, mantras, journaling, all of those things that you can do yourself. Some will work for you, some won't work for you, but it's understanding which work and when they work. Because some women, again, if you tune into your menstrual cycle, if you're still having that natural menstrual cycle, or your stress cycles, lunar cycles even for some women. But if you start to understand all of that, you can then tune in to different things working at different times as well. So for some women, breath work will work at certain points, but if their symptoms get so bad, so if your abdominal pain is so bad that you can't do breath work works for when your pain is between, say, 3 and 6 out of 10, but when your pain is between 6 and 10 out of 10, you can't do the abdominal breath work. So that's maybe when massage kicks in, or if stomach massage is too painful to do, then what do you do then? So it's understanding how your body reacts to different techniques, learning the techniques and studying how they impact on you. Then it's also about the stuff that you need to involve other people for. So that's when I start talking about the empowerment of, well, I can do this myself, but I know that I need an acupuncture session every 2 months. I know that I need to go for surgery. I know that I need to go and see a pelvic floor PT. Whatever it is that is the thing that you can't do yourself, or sometimes we just don't want to. Sometimes it's nicer having somebody else to do it for us. I know all the reflexology points to do it myself, but sometimes it's nice to have somebody else to do it. But it's knowing what you want, when you want it, because knowing how it helps. Hope that makes sense. So that's step 2. Step 2 is all about the treatment. Step 2 is all about knowing the treatment techniques, knowing when to use them, and knowing when to bring other people in to do the stuff you can't do. Step 3, and this is really where lifestyle and diet and stuff come in, but step 3 is about living your life, being mindful of step 1 and 2. Now, you don't have to make massive changes. I don't think I have any restrictions. That sounds really bad. I have boundaries and I'm a very moral person, but I don't have any restrictions in terms of how I live my life. So I don't eat a restrictive diet. I drink alcohol, I eat chocolate, I have sugar. I know that if I am stressed and I have too much chocolate or too much sugar, then my symptoms will flare, but I'm able to manage that. So I'm able to acknowledge and make a decision as to whether I want to have this family share. I mean, who thought share bags of chocolate were a good idea? Who actually share bags of chocolate? But anyway, I know that if I'm stressed, if I've got things going on in my life, if I'm not sleeping, if I'm not moving, and if I eat this whole bag, this whole share, in inverted commas, if I eat this share bag of Cadbury's giant buttons, other chocolates are available, then I am going to pay the price for all of that in the morning. I can make an informed decision. Do I eat the chocolate? Of course I do. Do I avoid the chocolate? If I eat the chocolate, I know that tomorrow morning I will have to do A, B, C, and D to mitigate the hell that will be unleashed on me in the morning, or I can just choose to avoid the chocolate and have a glass of wine instead. Once you have that understanding of your endo, you know what your limits are or what your choices are. It gives you that power to choose. So step 3 is all about the lifestyle, integrating it into your life. Like I said, it doesn't have to be restrictive. You can make choices. So I hope that helps. If you do want help with any of this, then you can you can work with me. I'm fully booked at the moment, but I have a space for a one-to-one client opening towards the back end of next month, which is February 2025. So it does depend on when you listen to this podcast. Or I have a self-treatment protocol as well, which is an e-learning program. Not all of the techniques, not all of the stuff that it goes through will be relevant to you, but you will come out at the end of it with a toolkit that does work for you. So if you are not in a position where you want to work with me full time, that's absolutely fine, completely get that. But there's the e-learning program as well. Or you can just head over to the podcast, subscribe to the podcast for more of these kind of things. And there's also various things on my website as well that may be of use to you. There's loads of meditations coming soon as well. I'm just working on tons of meditation bundles as well. So if you want to do a bit of either digging down into causes, triggers, or just purely symptom management, relaxation, there's bits and pieces for everyone. So I hope this has helped. Let me know if it has. Let me know if it hasn't. Let me know if you want to listen to any specific topics in future podcasts. But for now, I shall let you go. I have ranted in your ears for long enough. I wish you a happy and healthy week ahead. And if you do have any questions or comments, then please do let me know.